Hello, everybody. It seems we're live and our session is underway. Welcome to our session, Investing in African Fragile States, Looking Forward, as part of the Ignite 8 conference. Thank you for joining us, and a special thanks to the Spark team for putting this together. This session will be an opportunity to share over a decade of lessons learned for investors and entrepreneurs, discussing how to invest responsibly in African fragile and conflict-affected situations, or FCS, what has worked, what has changed in the investment landscape, especially since the pandemic, and the opportunities and considerations that lie ahead. So without further ado, let me introduce our panelists. First, I have Michel Botsung. Michel is the manager of IFC's FCS Africa, Fragile and Conflict-Affected Situations in Africa program. He joined IFC 17 years ago and has since held several field positions in North Africa, the Middle East, India, and more recently Africa, based in Nairobi. Next, we have Olivier Buyoya, who's a country manager at IFC. He's been the country manager for the Côte d'Ivoire cluster. That's covering Côte d'Ivoire, Guinea, Mali, Liberia, and Sierra Leone since March 2019. Prior to that, he was IFC's resident representative in Guinea since February 2017. He joined IFC in 2008 as a trade finance officer. And our third panelist is Jima Lavali, who's a country coordinator for FCS Africa. Again, just so you guys get used to the acronym, Fragile and Conflict-Affected Situations in Africa. Jima has been a country coordinator for FCS Africa, covering Sierra Leone since August 2015 and Côte d'Ivoire since October 2018, overseeing operations and advisory and supporting investments. Prior to that, she worked extensively across West Africa before joining IFC in 2015. I'm Idil Abshir. I'm going to be your moderator for this session. I have been with the FCS Africa team doing communications and knowledge management since 2017. So with that, thank you very much for attending our session. A few housekeeping rules. Please stay on mute unless you're the one speaking. And please feel free to put your questions in the chat as and when they occur to you. And if you have a particular panelist you would like to address them, please feel free to go ahead and do that as well. So thank you very much. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Michel Botsung for some opening remarks. Michel, over to you.
Yes, thanks, Idil. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Let me first start by thanking our good friends from Spark. I must say I'm a big fan of the Ignite event. I have been missing it last year, and I'm very happy to see that you have been creative enough to actually bring it back online. It's always for us a great opportunity to meet people, to be exposed to new ideas, to identify potential clients, and to really be stimulated by some of the great ideas that are floating around. So congratulations, and thanks for offering us the opportunity to speak a little bit and reflect back on what we have been trying to do across African fragile and conflict situations. As you know, IFC is the private sector arm of the World Bank Group, and we have a strong request from our shareholders and from the broader World Bank Group to do more and better across African fragile and conflict situations. The FCS matters for us mostly because at the core, the extreme poverty will be concentrated in fragile situations. And we have been asked to actually find ways to actually improve and increase the level of private sector engagement in those markets, or the way I would call it, responsible private sector. And it has been my privilege to actually manage quite a small boutique program called CASA, which stands for Conflict Affected States in Africa, for the last 6-7 years, which comes in support to the broader IFC teams to make sure that we can deploy all our services across fragile and conflict situations. And the panel today is really the opportunity to reflect back on some of the learnings. What does it take to do more? Why are those markets very different from more stable markets? And what we should be focusing on moving forward. And I'm very glad that I have the opportunity to be joined by two of my colleagues who are really the guys on the ground who bring a lot of experience and a lot of expertise to make things happen on the ground. And what I would like is really to have a very candid discussion with the audience also, and I'm very glad to with my colleagues to address some of the questions that may be asked. But let me maybe highlight a couple of points before we move to Olivier and Jima, if you allow me, Idil. So the first point I wanted to highlight is the fact that IFC is today probably the biggest the investor from all the development finance institutions across African FCS. We have over the last 11, 12 years invested a bit more than 5.1 billion US dollars, which is significant. More is required, but that's already significant. And we had quite a few learnings. So let me maybe emphasize some of them. I think the first one is that for a development finance institution, a fragile conflict situation is not business as usual. We face so many challenges that come in addition to what we face in more stable markets. The lack of data, the fragility of the economy, the lack of partners to work with, fluctuations. Getting out of fragility is not a smooth ride. So it's really not business as usual. I think that's one point to really take into consideration. And because it's not business as usual, it requires a set of significant additional instruments. The second element is that we have learned over the last 10 years that we tend to be able to invest and we do business and we support clients when we are on the ground. I think this capacity to be present on the ground is absolutely essential. It's a key enabler. More proximity to the client, more proximity to the government, and the ability to react more rapidly. I think it's a no-brainer, but that's a key element. The third one is something that we may not pay so much attention to in other markets, but understanding the political economy. So what are the key drivers? What are the key dynamics at play? Who are the key players in the country is even more important in an FCS setting than in other type of market. The fourth element is the importance, and we are blessed to have an increasing range of those instruments, the importance of blended finance and de-risking instruments. So blended finance is public money that we can mobilize alongside our own resources to be deployed. And that's a key instrument and also a key de-risking instrument. So we need them more than ever to be effective in FCS settings. The next one is really, I think that's also a message I'm giving to our colleagues and to everyone. We cannot wait for the perfect environment. We cannot wait for things to be, all the stars to be aligned. We need to engage early, and often doing an investment helps us to improve the dialogue with the government, help improving the business environment, and showcase and demonstrate that it's feasible. So that ability to actually engage early is absolutely key. The next point I wanted to highlight is the fact that unlike when you're based in Delhi, where I was a few years ago, you cannot just wait for an investor to approach you, but we need more and more to actually increasingly incubate projects. And instead of waiting for the perfect transaction, we need to help creating it, engaging with a wide range of stakeholders. And stakeholder is the other point I wanted to highlight, the importance of partnerships. We cannot just operate on our own. We cannot function from an ivory tower somewhere and a well air-conditioned office, but we need to engage in a wide range of partnerships, from NGOs to activists to UN agencies to other investors. The range of people we engage with in fragile conflict systems goes far beyond the way we do business in other markets. And just to end, I think the other element which is characteristic of FCS and which is a responsibility for investors is really the conflict dimension, making sure that whatever we do doesn't contribute unintendedly to actually aggravate some of the factors of fragility and conflict. So the ability to analyze that and to act on that is an important dimension which is under development. The two last ones is the fact that we have the responsibility also to broaden impact. Making the investment is important. Finding ways, often through what we call technical assistance and development projects, to broaden the impact of the investment, to include more people in the value chain, to provide more opportunities, is, in my opinion, something that is important everywhere, but essential in FCS and fragile states. And the last element is really a broader message to the development finance industry. Our responsibility is to push the envelope in those markets and not just to replicate and be happy with what we do. There's a responsibility to be more impactful and to push the envelope and to innovate. Let me stop there. Both Jima and Olivier have a lot of very interesting first-hand experiences to share. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michel. That was like a gold mine of information. I'm sure we'll be unpacking several of those lessons later on. So now I think it's a good opportunity to come over to you, Olivier. You have a cluster of countries that have had a range of different experiences, especially in recent times. What would you say to what it is about investing in these fragile contexts, what people need to consider, how to mitigate risk, and what has been your field reflection on COVID and some of the big political trade winds that have changed?
Thank you, Aileen. I hope we have the next 6 hours to respond to your question. But on a more serious note, look, it has been an interesting journey. Both Jima and I actually are part of the same team covering Sierra Leone with other colleagues, but what we call the cluster, those 5 countries that you just enumerated, have faced different challenges, and COVID is just one of them. I think that's the first maybe major point I would like to make is the reality is that for many countries around the world, COVID was a dramatic crisis. But for many countries in this part of the world, COVID is just one of those crises. As we speak, I'm sitting in Bamako, in Mali, with our fantastic colleagues here. When you look around and you hear what's going on in this country, of course, COVID is an issue, but it's just just another crisis, right? From security issues to a very severe and serious political situation. I'm sure many have followed what happened in the country, and the impact of that on the people, because at the end of the day, that's what we're interested in. The impact on the people, the poor people, the farmers, the private sector, the employees. It's just amazing. Mali is a landlocked country. When there is a crisis in the country, there was an embargo just after the coup. An embargo is a political decision, but the impact of that political decision on the country is just terrible. Next door, Mali, Guinea, same thing, political situation. Although the security issues are less of a concern, the impact of all of that has been dramatic. Now, when it comes to COVID specific impact, again, each country is different, and it comes back to the point that Michelle made earlier on. It's extremely important not to qualify or put all these countries in one box, right? COVID hit in 2020. Guinea posted a positive economic growth, close to 2%, while the entire world was in recession. Why? Because the country exports bauxite and the mining activities continued. Same thing with Côte d'Ivoire. Côte d'Ivoire actually posted a positive economic growth despite the impact of the COVID. Now, the devil is in the details, right? While some sectors are doing pretty well, I mean, even in Mali today, the mining activity is actually booming. Investors who have invested in mining, in gold mining businesses, they are making money. And you can see it well. Flights are almost full. Hotels have clients, and people are flying in and out for that specific activities. And then you move there, you come to other sectors, hospitality. Hotels have almost closed, and restaurants and others. And the difference between this part of the world and the rest of the world is there is no rescue package. There is no safety nets. When a hotel closed down, families don't get bread on the table. It's this as simple as that. Right? So that's what happened here, and we're not out of it. We have seen some improvements in terms of economic activity across the region for reasons that I personally still ignore. The impact of the health crisis in terms of number of cases, in terms of death toll, has not been as terrible as it has been in other parts of the world. Actually, in other parts of Africa, when you think about northern part of Africa, you think about South Africa, we have not seen that. We touch the wood and pray God, it remains like that, but the economic activity has resumed. But unfortunately, that's not the only crisis we have. Those are fragile countries. Now, to come back to your point, what does it take to do business in those countries? Well, it takes the long list of things that Michelle outlined, but I will just maybe highlight 3 of them. One, you just can't do business if you're not on the ground. So boots on the ground is extremely important, because related to the second point, it's very, very important to know, just a political economy. I would broaden a little bit the subject, and the governance structure in each country. Because ultimately, when it comes to investing in private sector, you're actually betting on someone's business. You're actually taking a risk on an individual. So you need to know, it's called Know Your Customer, KYC. You need to know that person and the environment around him. And that takes time. And you cannot fly in and fly out and pretend that you actually understand how business is done. You need that boots on the ground, and you need to be sufficiently connected to the people who are in the ground, and you also need to have the ability to take one step back and analyze the information around that. So that's the reasons why anyone who's serious in doing business is actually required to actually have boots on the ground. And it took us, as IFC, a few years to realize that. So hopefully we get in there. The second point, or third point, is actually the importance of establishing partnership with stakeholders, right? So one of the issues that we have in these countries, and one of the reasons why they are fragile, is because there are governance issues, right? And I say governance, you might hear corruption, you might hear all sorts of practices that we, as an international institution or as a credible investor, we don't want to see. But here is the lesson. Not everybody is corrupted. Not everybody is corrupted. Not everybody is adhering to that category of people we don't want to deal with. So if you are on the ground, the challenge is actually to know and identify those partners, including in government, so that you can build programs and solutions for the country. I spent 3 years in Guinea and we have a large mining portfolio in Guinea. In the Ministry of Mines of that country, they are fantastic people who care about the interests of their country. If you don't know, you won't believe that, because the overall reputation of the country is bad. So, same thing with the Ministry of Energy in Sierra Leone, and I'll let my friend and colleague Jima talk about that. It's extremely important to establish partnerships with people who are willing to actually start and continue that journey. Without those partnerships, it's actually not going to work. So there is an element of trust based on understanding and knowledge of what's going on the ground, but it's fundamental. The last point is, and this is a lesson from COVID. My lesson is, we cannot develop these countries without stepping up or scaling up our programs and interventions with local investors. So we tend to look at foreign investors because they do have capital and they do have knowledge, and those are extremely important, particularly in fragile countries. But projects and transactions where we were able to establish partnership between a local investor and the foreign partners have tended to be the most the most successful project I have seen. Because lesson from COVID is that people now understand that when the world closed off, then you need to rely on your own people. And this is the message that we're conveying to our governments in these countries. Look, treat well your private sector, because many of them, there are actually people who can invest in key sectors of the economy: energy, health, agriculture. You don't need to rely on funding coming from China or UK or France. Look at your own investors and treat them well, because if you treat them well, then they will invest. If you don't, then they'll take their money and go invest in Dubai or UK or Canada, where actually the investment climate is better. It comes back to, that's the last point, the importance of actually the business environment and investment climate. So let me stop there, Edith, unless you want me to continue for the next 3 hours.
I wish we had a 3-hour session. Alas, we don't. But that's actually a great way to segue into my question for Djima, which is, you've worked on several advisory and investment projects, and across West Africa. I mean, what works? What works, and what do you have to keep in mind when it comes to doing projects and interventions that deliver impact and build resilience?
Thank you, Idil. So just to pick up from where Olivier left off, I really think when it comes to any form of engagement in FCS countries, whether it's investments, whether it's advisory, there are key barriers that you have to understand, key barriers to engage in FCS. The first of this was what Olivier just touched on: difficult business environments. You'd find in fragile states that there are high percentage of unfavorable business environments. These countries, the challenges in engaging, just being on the ground is tough. So if you're not on the ground, it will pose even a more difficult challenge for you. There's poor infrastructure, weak legal and regulatory frameworks, high political and security risks, macroeconomic and currency risks, difficulties in general, just accessing market intelligence. So it's key to have the presence. A second barrier would be weak sponsor capacity, which Olivier also mentioned. In most of these fragile countries, you will come across sponsors with weak capacity. The markets we engage in are highly informal. They're fragmented with weak supply chains. Our local sponsors here, they have limited financial capacity, poor environmental, social, and governance compliance. So what we're learning, or what we're seeing on the ground, is that these sponsors, we need to spend more time with them. We need to support them better in order for them to just meet, for instance, IFC standards. And the last key barrier to engage in FCS countries is the availability of finance. This has been a challenge. It is limited in fragile states, generally, and more specific to Sierra Leone. There's a very small pool of interested domestic or international investors. It's emerging, but what we experienced over the years is there's a very small pool. That, coupled with high transaction costs, just creates further barriers to invest in fragile countries. But as we're going forward and we're charting a new way forward, I think COVID has really shown us, as Olivier was saying, that partnering with international foreign investors, with local investors, once you understand what these key barriers are, I believe we and various colleagues or investors on the ground in fragile countries will be better. It will be in a better position to identify the gaps and also work to develop resilient and impactful engagements. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Djima. So actually, Michelle, I have a question for you, and I think I can tie it to what Djima just said about charting the way forward. And my question for you is, what are some of the key themes or key strategic challenges or opportunities when you think about designing or implementing projects in these markets?
So one of the points I would like to highlight, Idil, is actually what we call responsible and conflict-sensitive investing. So I think it's a new notion which I think is absolutely key for the DFI industry. So what does it mean? Really, basically three things. It's not that there's a lack of private sector. I think Jima and Olivier highlighted that. I think there are many actors and many players. We cannot necessarily work with all of them. I think what our ambition and our mandate calls for us to focus on responsible and conflict-sensitive investment. So what does it mean in concrete terms? Really, basically three things. The first thing is the integrity. So we need to be able to work with people who are comfortable, a man, a lady, a team of entrepreneurs that we are very comfortable with, meaning that their behavior, their past is something we are very comfortable with. And that integrity element is absolutely essential for us. And it's something you can only decipher when you are present on the ground and you have that level of market intelligence and proximity. The second element is the quite demanding and rigorous environmental, social, and governance standards that we are expecting to see. And this covers a significant range of things, ranging from the absence of child labor to investments not taking place in a culturally sensitive place, but also, for example, in the hospitality sector, managing the effluents and not polluting. And I know that the practice on the ground, because there's not so much demand from the market, is not in favor of that. So we are trying to raise the standard. And the last element is really around the conflict sensitivity. So what does that mean? It's really understanding if the project has a risk to impact the key drivers of fragility and conflict. So this calls for really a different way of operating. We need first to educate the market and make sure that we can support sponsors at meeting our standards, but also understanding the drivers of conflict and then try to find specific ways of mitigating them. And for me, in FCS, that's something that the industry, the development finance industry, should commit to in a very systematic way. Those are important standards.
That's great. Thank you, Michel. So Olivier, we have a question for you in the comments that says, how do you deal with political exposure in businesses? So maybe I can let you take that one, and then...
Thank you, Aidil, for giving the easiest one. I appreciate that. No, I think it's an extremely, thank you, Mohammed, for raising it. It's an extremely important question. It goes back to the first point that maybe Michel was alluding to about integrity. I mean, our institutions, IFC particularly, but many other DFIs have strict rules and principles when it comes to dealing with what we call politically exposed persons in businesses. Now, again, it's extremely difficult subject, and here I want to bring in an aspect that I didn't mention earlier on. We need to be extremely humble about all these aspects. It's not black and white. There are a lot of gray zones, a lot of gray areas here. We, the team in our cluster, deal with these matters almost on a daily basis. And it's judgment call all the time. So, Mohammed, the first thing is you need to be humble about that, and you need to actually understand that it's not always black and white. Second, you need to rely on people you trust on the ground to provide you with the information required to take the decision. I'm talking about the region I know most, which is Africa. Well, in Africa, many people are related. Many people have the same names. It does not necessarily mean that there is something wrong about that. So you need to have the information, to have very strong procedures and rules internally to deal with that. So in IFC, we have a team, an integrity risk, we call it integrity risk officers, who are experienced, who have done and seen a number of those cases around the world. We rely on them, on their advices. And three, then you need to be courageous to take the call, because it's a judgment call at the end of the day. Now, while you should not and cannot have any form of excuse or any form of compromise, that's the term I was looking. At the same time, you need to understand that these are difficult region areas. Then you need to make judgments all the time, all the day. So that's a long response to your point, Mohammed. It's not easy, but if we want to do more in these countries, we need to make more of those judgment calls. If you don't want to do anything, then you can use that reason not to do anything.
Thank you very much for that response, Olivier. So Djima, for you, I would like to get your thoughts on what do you find the most concerning and what do you find the most hopeful in terms of the current kind of African FCS economic landscape?
Thanks, Idil. So where we still see concern in FCS economic landscape is that most of our local sponsors, they remain small. As I mentioned, limited capacity and limited access to financing. The landscape itself really over the years has not changed much. And this is where there is still some concern. But there is hope. There's still hope. I would say with the COVID-19 pandemic, this has brought about a lot of changes to our markets, both locally and globally. We've all experienced or seen the supply chain disruptions and so forth. I'll give an example of engaging with a client a couple of weeks ago who shared that, an importer who shared that the freight costs have spiked from $4,000 to $16,000 per container in the space of a month. And as a result of this spike in cost, we are seeing that prices on the ground for imported commodities are increasing. We're seeing some shelves empty in the shops. And it's given us a lot of concern. But out of this concern is also where we see the hope. Because among all of this disruption, we're starting to see some local sponsors looking at import substitution for some of these imported essential goods. We also engaged another client who in the past year has established a snack making factory here in Sierra Leone in the place of importing this item. And really we see these as new opportunities coming up. And even though we in the past thought, local sponsors were more challenging to engage with, we're also seeing strong local sponsors emerging. And there's this hope that going forward with the new tools and teams we have within IFC, we'll be able to engage. We'll be able to engage more. We'll look for more opportunities and work better with local sponsors. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Definitely a silver lining there with local sponsors rising to the occasion. Michelle, there's another question here in the comments. And since you talked about blended finance earlier, maybe you could speak to this. The question from Jesper DeWitt is, fragile countries have often lack of strong foreign currency in order to import proper equipment which cannot be produced locally, also for SMEs. Any creative ideas in order to boost local production, agro-processing, agro-services, artisan, etc.? So do you think you can take that question on?
I can try, Idil, and I would invite Olivier or Djima to jump in if required. I think the point that Djima just made about new market opportunities emerging now because of the crisis, because of the COVID consequences, because of the issues with global trade, is a fantastic opportunity for local entrepreneurs. We have done several investments, particularly in the countries covered by Olivier and Djima, supporting local investors to leverage some of those opportunities. And most of those transactions were actually smaller in size significantly smaller in size than the corporate IFC average. And we have deployed a large range of advisory services. Also, sometimes the level of advisory services is even higher than investment itself to make sure that they can leverage as many opportunities as possible. And the availability of blended finance is key. The availability of local finance currencies facilities is absolutely essential so that our clients don't have to take the foreign exchange risk. And we are increasingly equipped with that. But that's, for me, big opportunities. And that's the big element of hope. I'm very thrilled whenever I have a chance to go to the various countries by the level of entrepreneurship and the more sophisticated entrepreneurship that we see today compared to probably 20 years ago. That's extremely encouraging. And for us to support that is a great opportunity and something very important.
Thank you very much, Michel. I think since we've kind of mentioned new opportunities a couple of times, Olivier, I'd like to invite you to maybe add to that answer, but also if you could speak to any new or nascent opportunities that kind of across sectors that can maybe keep popping into your mind or catching your eye. I'd be curious to hear your prognosis on that as well. So please go ahead.
No, thank you, Adele. Just to build on what Michel said, I think first, to just first question from what we've seen in Mali, in Guinea, in Liberia, in Sierra Leone. I mean, when you look at the private sector landscape, and Jesper is actually in Burundi, my country, so I can add on that one. If you look at the landscape of private sector, you will see that there are actually successful businessmen who have accumulated their wealth through trading. So basically importing stuff that are produced elsewhere. I mean, it's a pattern. You have literally people who are billionaires in West Africa because they've made their money in commercial trade. Now, if you look at some of the emerging leaders, of course, everybody talks about Dangote. There are thousands or so there are hundreds of smaller Dangotes in the region. So people who have basically transferred from pure trading to local production, to producing what they used to import a couple of years ago. We've supported some of them in Guinea and elsewhere. Now, what would be interesting, Jesper, is to actually understand what happened in their mind, the thinking process for them to take the decision to stop importing and start producing locally. I mean, we can again discuss this for the next 2-3 hours, but fundamentally, I think there are three things. One, the government, the regions have to create the conditions for this to happen, right? So if a couple of years ago, in many countries, whether at the national or at the regional level, a decision were taken to favor, to give incentive to local production came to cement, right? So all of a sudden, a number of investors started investing in the cement production, and now in most of the countries in West Africa, at least, you have overcapacity on cement. Same thing happened in flour mills and in other sectors. So you need at some point in time an incentive from government and decision say we will actually favor this. The second point is what Jima said about access to finance. Right? Now that's where we come in. And we come in with a combination of straight loans and then blended finance, because we need to understand that in those countries, particularly smaller countries, Sierra Leone, Liberia, Guinea, and the others, it's much more difficult for entrepreneurs to have access to long-term funding at the reasonable cost for them to succeed. So that's what we need to do. And the last point is, of course, in combination between our institution and the government, you need to have improved macro and investment climate. In countries where you have an inflation at 17% or 15%, you cannot decently envisage investment, long-term investment. It's not going to help the world. That's where it's extremely important. We engage on a regular basis with our colleagues at the IMF, at the World Bank, but you have to have a macro environment stable, or at least positive outlook for this to happen. Otherwise, a rational investor would always choose to import instead of investing because the macro condition is not favorable. So those are the three things that could happen. And again, just as you can see, nothing new, nothing creative really, but it's a combination of those and a lot of goodwill and push from all of us to get us there.
Thank you very much, Olivier. Well, as they say, time flies when you're having fun. So we're coming almost to the end of our session. It feels like it flew past us. So I'm going to maybe ask a brief question and for a parting thought from each of you. Jima, I'll start with you. Just based on the theme of this conference, which is around jobs, what works when it comes to job creation in your thoughts, and any additional parting words you'd like to leave?
Thanks, Idil. So in FCS countries, situations on the ground, as we've been sharing, tend to be very fragile. You have to be innovative. You have to find ways to push the envelope. How do you adapt to the changing situations that comes usually with changing governments? And how do you remain impactful? So taking in context, the context of COVID, I'll probably just share an example of our advisory program with an investment client we have here in the mining sector. So just after the outbreak of the COVID pandemic in 2020, our advisory team was able to quickly restructure its activities in order to address the pandemic. Carried out a survey in the host communities around the mining activities, and they identified that the most recommended medical guidance on preventing COVID was hand washing. That was the single most recommended medical guidance. The team was able to quickly launch a capacity building intervention for local women on how to make end market antiseptic soaps. The activity not only prevented and mitigated the spread of the virus, but it also provided these women with income to maintain their livelihoods, and resulted in training of trainers, resulted in capacity building to about 45 girls from various communities, various villages. And most of these 45 girls were able to go on and start new businesses. 23 of those girls actually went on to start new businesses from the proceeds of the soap sales, and 80% were able to contribute to savings in community banks and saving groups in their communities. So for us, I mean, this really, during the pandemic, in a fragile state, it's really an example of not only job creation, but also just financial inclusion. And just to, as you mentioned, Idil, as a parting word, and I saw a question in the chat about lessons learned. I think for my parting words, it would be around the key lessons learned over the past decade or so, is that being present in the markets where we work is the game changer. Olivier mentioned this, Michelle mentioned this. This is the game changer, being on the ground, being able to test the pulse on the ground, knowing where the business is, what the challenges are. And just being on the ground has really helped us to understand our markets better. It's helped us to build our pipelines. The presence on the ground really has helped us understand local context, the fragility drivers, conflict drivers, as Michelle mentioned, giving us opportunities to engage early where we see opportunities or issues that we need to work to adapt in the case of the advisory program I shared. And also seek partnerships. Olivier had mentioned partnerships not only with government, partnerships with other donor partners, and just private sector players, and look for look for areas where, we can go beyond just a transaction. We can broaden our impact on the ground through our transactions. So really, in conclusion, from my side, to create jobs, to build resilience and achieve success in FCS markets, this requires some amount of presence on the ground. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jima, for sharing those thoughts with us. Actually, I think several themes have come up amongst the three of you, from innovation to partnerships, kind of more strategic considerations. So Michelle, could you maybe talk to us a little bit about those and share some of your parting thoughts? And then we'll go to Olivier to close out. Thank you, Michelle.
Yeah, thanks, Idil. I don't know how we are doing with time, but I like very much the last words of Jima. I think she covered many points. Let me just say something about partnerships. I think we engage with a much larger range of stakeholders in FCS settings, and it's absolutely key. They bring us the understanding of what's happening. They enable us to actually deliver services in areas where we are too far away or it's too risky to go. They bring us investment opportunities sometimes. And the example I had in mind I wanted to highlight is also the engagement we have recently in the refugee and forced displacement space. Without the support of UNHCR that allows us to understand and allows us to travel to those places and supports our operations there, it wouldn't be possible. So basically, I would say the sky is the limit, but the partnerships are enabling many things for institutions like us. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Michelle. I think this is a good opportunity. Olivier, earlier you talked about you can't use a broad brush on FCS. They're all extremely unique. And Jima talked about tailoring, and Michelle talked about local context. So maybe, do you have any words on kind of considerations that DFIs should be making, that investors should be making when they're dealing here? And not all FCS are created the same, and so maybe as a parting thought of opportunities and considerations to make as we move forward in what seems like a increasingly challenging intersection of issues across the world.
No, thank you, Idil. And I think, again, each country is different, each situation is different, but there is common thread. One of them is that despite the challenges, there are opportunities in private in these countries. And we can go on and on and on again. We can actually list a number of very interesting projects that we've done in different countries, from a mango processing plant in Mali to a beverage company that we're looking at in Sierra Leone. Those are opportunities on the ground. And so I think we need, if I would summarize, there is hope in those countries. There are opportunities. Not everybody is politically exposed. Not everybody is corrupted. Not everybody is operating at different standards. So that's one key message. The second message is that we as DFIs have to be there, because those are the companies that are actually creating jobs and that are having impact on people. If anything, if we are serious about development, we should actually increase, and this is the third point, you need to increase your risk appetite. You need to increase your risk appetite in order to do more. And in order to do that, you need to have boots on the ground, you need to have new instruments, de-risking instruments, you need to be creative in the way you do things, but overall, you need to increase your risk appetite. Now, coming from a banking background, a risk can be structured, can be mitigated, can be guaranteed. Those are the instruments we talked about. But there are some risks that we should not compromise on. Those are integrity. Those are the issues around sustainability, etc. We should not, for no reason, we should not go there, because we will be shooting ourselves in the foot. But if you actually understand that and you are eager to do business in these countries, there are business opportunities. There are people who are investing. And as far as private citizens is concerned, there are people who are making money. So being prosperous. Now, how do we actually partner with those, bring in our knowledge, our expertise from different regions, and help them and help those countries scale up? That's actually the question, right? Now, when it comes to opportunities, look, we've seen the digitalization is helping some countries, some sector leapfrogging. Right? We are talking about digitalizing value chain. It is happening, and it's happening with companies here, not necessarily the big multinationals from elsewhere. So there are opportunities, and I think I will end there with a note of hope, and I hope that everybody here on this call, I'm sure we share the same, at least passion for this the development.
I think it froze briefly. Let's give it a moment to see if it comes back. Well, while we wait, it seems like we've heard several very powerful words: innovation, agility, and it seems like hope, So I'm very excited. Thank you very, very much for your time. I see, Olivier, you're back. It just bit off the last of your sentence, so I don't know if you want to say anything else.
I said, despite the challenges, there is hope. That's what I was saying.
Exactly. So let's hopefully all our speakers, thank you for staying on that extra 10 minutes. We have quite a full room. We hope that you will look into more of what IFC is doing in African FCS. And thank you all very much for attending. And thank you very much to the panelists for your time.
Thanks, Idil. And thanks, Dima and Olivier.